Croeso, Difda, Bernachtin, Gia Hwitch, Fulcher, Daymat. Welcome to the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. I am your humble host, Sian Esther Powell, and I'm going to be taking you on a journey through all the myths and legends of the 6 Celtic nations. That's Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, Isle of Man, Scotland and Ireland. Welcome. Hi everyone. It's been a little while, hasn't it? It sometimes feels more difficult when there's been longer periods between episodes. I feel like it should be easier because you're like, oh, it's been a long time. I've got to get back and do something. But it makes it more difficult. Like, the longer time that passes, the more difficult it is to come back because I just feel a strange mix of emotions. I feel embarrassed that I haven't posted anything in such a long time. And I feel like for myself, and there might be people listening that relate to this, so it's the only reason I'm really going to talk about it. I don't want to be too self-indulgent, but if there's anyone out there listening, hopefully you can also relate to this and feel a little bit less alone. For me, I feel like something has to give sometimes. I work full-time. I have quite a lot of physical and mental health things going on. And I try and keep a social life going with lots of friends and what have you. So in many ways, I'm trying to be a functioning member of society, but in other ways, I just struggle so much. I struggle to be a person, and it's frustrating to me because one of the first things to go is my actual passionate things. Is this podcast something that I love, I feel proud of, I feel passionate about? But when I'm struggling, if my health gets bad, if I'm busy, if whatever challenges I'm facing, this is the first to go. And I must apologise for that because I know there's people that have been listening since the beginning or who have recently started listening and they've binge listened a bunch of episodes. And then you get to a dead end and it's like, when is she going to upload again? It's been months. So here I am. I won't make any promises going forward about how regular my episodes will be. I've always said that I want them to be monthly, but as you well know, that is often not the case. So that's out and done with. Hello, welcome back to the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. Really great to be here. Really excited to be doing another episode. And I hope that you're all well. We are, of course, anyone that has been listening to this podcast for any amount of time will know that we cover historically, it was each of the 6 Celtic nations. But recently, I have added Galicia and Asturias to it as well as Celtic regions with fascinating Celtic culture and folklore. And I just felt like it was time to incorporate some of these stories into the podcast as well. So if there's anyone out there from Galicia or Asturias or even Portugal with family from these areas, out there listening, hello, welcome. Really glad to have you here. I guess we better just get into it. So today I am back to Galicia and I'm looking at a creature that's quite similar to things that I've covered on the podcast before. And I think I've always had an interest in tracing the similarities between the Celtic nations and Celtic regions. And I wonder if there's, cross-pollination or if it's just a case of human beings are more similar than different and we create similar stories from similar landscapes and what have you. Or whether it's a little bit of a mix of both. I think that's more of a compelling argument, really. So today we are going to be talking about the Urco. Galician folklore, the Urco is a spectral dog, much like the black dogs that I've covered in other episodes. The Moddy Do in Manx folklore, and also, of course, we've got Black Shuck in English folklore. So it does pop up quite often, this spectral dog. Let's not forget the lovely hounds of Annwn in Welsh mythology as well. Those beautiful white hounds with their red ears, the hunting dogs of the lords and kings of the other world. So the black dog, or a spectral dog, comes up quite a lot in lots of different myths and legends, especially those from Celtic regions and from neighbouring regions as well. And usually these dogs, well, I say usually, there actually isn't a usually. They tend to haunt, lonely roads, graveyards. There's lots of different places, old abandoned castles. There's lots of places where you can find them. Sometimes they are simply like a ghost. They haunt a specific place. Sometimes they are the actual bringer of death itself. So they are genuinely dangerous in and of themselves. But a lot of the time they act as a lot of other ghosts and spectral characters in myths and legends, in that they simply haunt a place for whatever reason. A lot of the dogs in the myths and legends of England and Britain and Celtic regions are big black dogs with usually big red glowing eyes. So I absolutely love dogs. Many of you who follow my other social media stuff will have seen my Mr. Bailey dog, pride and joy of my life. So I love dogs, but I would not want to come across a gigantic black hound with glowing red eyes in an abandoned building in the middle of the night. No, thank you. That is the one dog in the world that I would be like, I don't want to go up to you actually, and I don't want to say hello. But I do find it interesting when dogs pop up in folk tales and myths and legends, because dogs have been growing alongside humanity for such a long time. They have place in our lives and have for a long time. We have helped shape dogs. Literally, we have changed the way that they look for whatever reasons, different jobs just being simply superficial. So it's interesting when dogs pop up in myths and legends as well. So the Galician Urco is very similar to some of these dogs in that, again, it's a large black hound with glowing red eyes, although some interpretations have it more as a wolf than a domestic dog, because wolves seem to be quite a key feature in a lot of Galician folk tales. But unlike some of the others, which I've said haunt graveyards or, old castles and things like that, Urco's otherwise translated as the dog of the sea. And one little unique detail I love about the Urco is, although it's big and black like a lot of the other dogs, it's speckled with bits of white fur like sea salt. The dog of the sea with its glowing red eyes, black fur, and just little tiny hints of sea salt white fur. So let's set the scene a little bit, shall we? Let's do a little impromptu story. Imagine a lonely walk home at the end of a long day that is now just turning to night. You look to the side and you can just about spot the ocean peeking through the deep fog that is coming from the sea. You start to feel a sense of unease. You've made this walk in the dark many times before, and yet there's something about this night. It feels like there's eyes watching you as you walk, and suddenly you hear it. That unmistakable sound of rattling chains. Your blood runs cold. Before your conscious mind has even realised what is happening, you see the sea, the fog, you hear the rattling chains, and your heart stops. There's only one creature this could be. And you realise that the sounds of those rattling chains have stopped. You see the glowing red eyes before you see the giant horns above. overwhelming stench of death, rotten fish hits your nostrils, and you feel a force of hot breath hit your face. The mist begins to part. The eyes look bigger than your head. For you to see them at eye level, the creature must have been crawling towards you. This is a huge beast. You know you cannot talk your way out of this horror. This is the end. Well, that was a bit spooky, wasn't it? I enjoyed that. Bit of a scary one for once. You might have noticed a few details there, but the El Urco also has horns, which is another distinctive feature of this creature, unlike the Black Shuck or the Moddy Doo of Manx folklore. This one has horns, and it is covered in chains wrapped around its whole body. It's specifically associated with the sea, as I mentioned previously, of the sea. And it was just the idea of like walking home at night and then hearing the chains before you had really clocked what was happening, and then seeing the red eyes before you see anything else. I just found that really spooky and scary. Now, there are some other really fascinating aspects of this folklore that you also don't quite get anywhere else. The El Urco is also associated with the other world, or I should say a other world, because there seem to be lots of different other worlds and lots of different myths and legends. But this, much like a lot of the myths of Ireland, is an other world associated with the sea. So El Urco comes from a land called, or I shouldn't say land, a realm or a world called Boron, a sort of dark, foggy, misty underworld type of place. And when you see it, much like when you hear the call of the banshee, you know time is up, really. Usually the banshee is you're hearing someone else's time is up, but it can also be your own. But if you're hearing and seeing the Urco, it's probably not good news for you. I don't know if you could heard, Mr. Bailey in the background did a massive sigh. Never known a dog like him to let out such sighs, I tell you that now. He has a proper little grump on sometimes. He's usually a happy little chappy. But if he's waiting for, you know what, a WALK... which he is at the moment, and I'll do it after I've finished recording. He gets a right little strop on, and you can just hear him go, right little huff. For those who have never listened to the podcast before, Mr. Bailey is my little tiny brown Labradoodle. But back to the Urco. I found that aspect really fascinating, actually, to find out about a whole other world, Boron, because I love episodes where we've covered the other world, where we've talked about, its mentions in the Mabinogi, and I am desperately wanting to do an episode on the Tuatha Danann of Irish mythology. I promise you, listeners, I've been wanting to do that for years. It's just, I feel like it's such a big mammoth task, because there's so much to talk about that it might need to even be broken down into multiple episodes. But I will talk about the Tuatha Danann one of these days. I've also seen the term El Mas Allah for the underworld. You will have to excuse me, when it comes to the Galician and Asturian episodes, a lot of the sources are, of course, in Spanish. And it's sometimes difficult to find sources in English. So, I'm trying my best. But I'm sorry for any listeners out there who are like, oh, she is butchering those words. Sorry. I do plan on trying to get some nice books on Galician and Asturian folklore when I can. But some of the ones like translated to English can be a little bit expensive, but I will get them. So in future episodes, I hope to have like a little bit of a bank of some really nice folk tales ready to go. I do love this connection to the underworld. So in the stories of El Urco, it seems that this is a huge dog. Now, there is a little bit of inconsistency in how big Urco is described to be. Sometimes it's just like a very big hound. Sometimes it's colossal, gargantuan beast. So I thought I would use that in my spooky little story. But it resides in a sort of underworld, otherworld, misty, dark place connected to the sea. And it rises on foggy nights when someone is about to die. And it is an omen of death. So when you do see it or hear it, it does mean that someone around you or you yourself is going to die. And I think, you'll have noticed that we've done quite a lot of omens of death on this podcast, and that is simply because there is a lot of death folklore. There's a lot of folklore associated with funerals, associated with death, dying, or the afterlife, and ghosts. So, the big monumental aspects of our life, birth, death, some of the things in between, these are all going to be associated with lots of folk tales and myths and legends. But it comes out of the sea, covered in chains, with horns, glowing red eyes, and the speckled white fur. So although on surface level it has those initial kind of similarities with the other black dogs in folklore that we've covered, it actually has loads of distinct, unique qualities as well. Some sources also say that he has very, very large ears and sometimes describe him as having yellow eyes as well, other than red. So as well as foggy nights, it does seem to be that a lot of the tales also include like a full moon as well. So you can just imagine, because I love a misty evening near the sea where you've got a bit of mist and that full moon. I think it's so beautiful and peaceful. So it's interesting as well that actually that setting it is a backdrop to some kind of horrifying stories. I would also say that El Urco shares some common characteristics with the Irish puka as well, and not just Black Shuck or the Moddy Doo or those types of creatures. I think there's also some like trickster type creatures that it has things in common with as well. What is also interesting about creatures like this is that when you find stories that are rooted in a sort of Christian context, they are described as being hellhounds, creatures from hell. But in other stories, they're more creatures from another place, an otherworld or an underworld, something outside of the confines of the Christian heaven and hell. But stories that are rooted within the Christian context very much describe this almost as like a sort of demon type creature, something coming from hell. And hellhounds are quite a common feature that you find in, I suppose, like pop culture, fantasy and horror and that kind of thing. So interesting. I wonder if hellhounds, as we know them in pop culture and that kind of thing, if they all are coming from these types of stories, because I suspect that they are. Or whether it's more like my original point at the beginning of the episode, in that dogs will just feature in a lot of our stories because they have grown up alongside us and because they are so present in a lot of our lives. What do you reckon? It'd be interesting to know what your kind of thoughts are on this, whether it's these types of creatures have influenced hellhounds and other pop culture creatures or other myths and legends around the world, or dogs feature heavily in lots of myths and legends of various cultures just because dogs are very present in a lot of our lives. Or whether it's just a bit of a mix-up of all of it. That's probably the more likely one. There's one really cool aspect of this story that I've come across as well from some sources, and that is that El Urco, in a way, sometimes creates a sort of what's the word? it collects souls as it goes along, and it collects other dogs. So it can visit a town or a village, not just visit one single person like I chose to represent in my little made up story, but it can visit, a town or a village or a city even, and it can move through the streets, and dogs will follow it as it moves through the streets, and it will collect up and portent the death of many people. As it's moving through the streets of a more urban area, it will stop in front of a house and growl or howl when it's foretelling that someone in that house is going to die, much like the scream of a banshee. And that's another thing. You've got now the similarities with the Irish banshee as well. I love finding all of these similarities between stories and the shared characteristics that these folk tales have. But because it's so associated with the sea, I imagine this creature is associated with lots of maritime areas. Lots of places that perhaps had fishermen or sailors as part of the community, or perhaps not, but areas that are kind of more accessible by the sea, because it's representing the sea and that kind of wild natural element and the danger of the sea as well. So I just think there's a lot of really interesting things going on in this story. It's not just another big black dog that's scary. It's also showing kind of the cross-pollination of other stories and other shared characteristics, and how fun it is to trace the similarities between stories. I'm also seeing a kind of difference between the stories that are in a more Christian context and then the stories that are not. So you've almost got, you could have an argument that this has undergone quite a lot of Christianization, and then there might have been these stories that existed pre-Christianity, but that is a lot harder to prove, considering that a lot of these nations that I'm talking about have been sort of majority Christian for a long time. But I just think there's a lot of really interesting things going on here. And it's such a visual story as well. I know that sounds silly because all of the things I talk about are very visual, but there's something about imagining this misty night, full moon, and if you're an observer, seeing this great chained beast come out of the sea, dragging its paws and the chains alongside it, glowing red or yellow eyes, massive horns that you can just about spot through the fog, making its way into the town, and then hearing the yips and barks of other dogs as they join alongside and run at the heels of this great beast. And then later on, the creature going back, just as dawn is about to break, the night is about to turn back into day, and the creature goes back into the ocean, its chains slinking along the sand and then disappearing, and all of those dogs are just left on the shore side watching it go beneath the water. There's just something so, really visual about that, really interesting. I'd love to see some more visual media that includes that. There's also some connections to the Santa Campana, or the Holy Company, which is a procession of the dead, and very similar to stories of the Wild Hunt that you can find in Welsh and other nations' mythology as well. I don't think I'll delve into that too much because I might end up doing a whole episode on the Wild Hunt that sort of talks about lots of different places and isn't just focused on one region's folklore. So I think I'm going to leave it there because my Mr. Boy, he might turn into El Urco if I don't take him for his walkies soon. It's been really great to sit down and chat to you all about this really interesting bit of folklore. Hopefully, I think I'm reigniting my passion again, and I really want to be a bit more regular with episodes, but I won't promise anything. It's been really fun to research this one and been really fun to share it with you all. And I hope that you enjoy this episode, and see you again soon. I am your host, Sian Esther Powell, and that has been another episode of the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. If you would like to find it elsewhere on the interwebs, you can also find me on Twitter at Celtic Myths Pod, on Facebook under Celtic Myths and Legends Podcast, on Patreon at Celtic Myths Pod, as well as Instagram at Celtic_Sian, and also CelticSian.co.uk. Thank you, Muraz, Diolch, Tachpalet, Guramahagat, Trigare, Guramayed. Thank you, and speak to you next time. Thank you.